New details revealed in the murder of 12-year-old Texas girl Jocelyn Nungaray.
When you have a crime as heinous as this, strangulation, you're up close and personal with this person. And so it creates and presents this person who is extremely heartless, who has no heart at all.
Now, the two suspects charged with capital murder are speaking out to investigators.
They have each admitted that they are covering up a murder.
But instead of fessing up, they're pointing the finger at each other.
If they are not informed about what that law is, then they're going to continue to try to point the finger at someone else.
The story takes us back to Sunday, June 16th in Houston, Texas. 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungaray and her younger brother went to bed around 10 o'clock. But at about midnight on June 17th, Jocelyn snuck out. She made her way to the nearby convenience store 7-Eleven, and all this is corroborated by surveillance video. The next time Jocelyn was seen was at about 6 o'clock that morning when a woman was dropping her husband off at work. She noticed Jocelyn's body in a nearby bayou. Police later determined she'd been strangled to death and sexually assaulted. The gruesome details of the crime shocked the nation, but also the Houston area, where attorney Bridget Williams is based. This is a really divisive story for many different elements, but specifically because we have a 12-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted and then murdered. Is this a shocking thing for your community?
I believe it's a huge, shocking matter that's for the community, for, like I said, Houston, Harris County, and in the entire state of Texas. Whenever someone loses their life, especially, I mean, we go further to a child, this is something that's going to affect just the hearts of everyone who not only was affected in some way, so their families, but just the communities that surround it and who care about them. So this is a major issue, even so much that the mayor of Houston has addressed the matter, and even our Senator Ted Cruz, who is out of that area as well.
In the days after Jocelyn's murder, investigators pieced together a timeline. Using the same surveillance video that caught Jocelyn walking alone, investigators found video of the 12-year-old speaking with two men. Jocelyn's teenage boyfriend, who was on the phone with her during that trip to 7-Eleven, said he overheard her speaking with the men. Investigators released surveillance images of the men to local media outlets, asking for anyone who recognized the men to come forward. That's how they found suspects 21-year-old Johan Jose Rangel Martinez and 26-year-old Franklin Jose Pena Ramos. Both men have been charged with capital murder. Now we're hearing a little bit more in depth about the suspects. And what's interesting is there's two, and they're seemingly turning on each other. What do you make of that just from the jump?
Well, whenever you have individuals who come and they give an admission to things, they are giving a confession. We take that sometimes with a grain of salt. So, but we are looking into that. It is not uncommon for defendants to sometimes change their stories at a later time. So, with that being said, the state and the prosecution, they will take those stories into consideration, but whenever we're looking at it, both of those individuals are being charged with this crime. So it's like, well, maybe one person is believable, but the other one is not. So I don't think that one person is more credible than the other.
According to a newly released search warrant, investigators spoke to both Pena and Martinez Rangel separately, and they each told different stories. So if we're breaking down what they actually spoke to investigators about, one of the suspects, Pena, he says that they were at this local restaurant from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. And this is something that we can confirm because there's surveillance video, they had their cell phones. We know that they for sure were there. So he's at least telling the truth on that half of things. So does that make us more inclined to believe him for the rest of it? Or should we, as you said, be taking it with a grain of salt?
I think we should still continue to take it with a grain of salt because there's another person there who is giving a completely different story. Now, the issue here is that both of them were at least present. We know that because, like you said, there is surveillance cameras that show that. So that means that one person may have lured the individual there, maybe both of them lured the 12-year-old girl to this place, right? And then at least one of those individuals committed the murder. Now, that means one person may be the principal and one person is the accomplice. So one person just assisted. However, in Texas, we don't differentiate those two. We have what we call the law of parties. And that just means that if the accomplice and the principal both are there, they both will be charged with the same offense. So each one of them can still be charged with capital murder.
According to Pena's story, he's saying he was the accomplice and Martinez Rangel was the principal. But even if that's true, the prosecution will likely tackle each case the same way.
I think it'll still be very similar whenever you have an accomplice, so someone who just assisted or aided in some way. Again, they're still able to be charged with the overall line offense. And so they will move forward, maybe even use the other person's statement in some way. They only really have to show, again, that they assisted in some way with the furtherance of this particular crime happening. That's all they have to show.
So then, if that's all they have to show, why are these two defendants turning on each other and pointing the finger at the other person when they're both charged with the same crime?
Well, it sounds like these two defendants don't know that rule, right? They don't know the law of parties. A lot of times, whenever you have two individuals or a party of individuals, they are pointing the finger at the other person. Oh, no, this person did it, this person did it, or this person tried to cover it up. Well, again, if they are not informed about what that law is, then they're going to continue to try to point the finger at someone else.
Pena says after leaving the restaurant and bar, he and Martinez Rangel ran into Jocelyn. Court docs state, quote, Johan asked JN for directions to get back to their apartment. In the legal documents, Jocelyn is only identified as her initials, JN. Pena told investigators that as they were walking westbound on Rankin Road, he kissed JN on the lips. And from there, things only get worse. Pena says he saw Johan, who was behind JN, wrap his forearm around her neck. Johan kept his forearm around the complainant's neck and walked her to the area under the bridge. Franklin stated that he saw Johan put JN onto her back. While she was on the ground, Johan took off JN's pants and then climbed on top of her, while holding her arms down over her head. Pena said he told Johan to stop and that they should leave. However, Johan told him, I have to finish what I started. That's when Pena observed Johan wrap his forearm around JN's neck again and cover her mouth with his hand. Franklin stated that he observed that JN was deceased, and then Johan tied her hands and feet together. Pena also denied touching JN physically or sexually assaulting her, but even so, his confession is problematic. And it seems, regardless of who participated in what aspect of this, they knew at the end of the day that this girl was being murdered, that her body was left behind. So obviously that is some sort of crime here. But is it possible that either of them are hoping, oh, maybe my charges could be dismissed or I could change the charge potentially? Like, what is going through their minds?
Well, I would think that's probably what they're thinking. I would, if I were them, they would need to be hiring counsel in some kind of way, or at least appointed counsel, right? If they cannot afford counsel, then the state will appoint them someone, and that attorney will inform them of their rights, inform them of the process and laws that affect them. And so, again, right now, they've spoken to the investigation team down in Harris County without an attorney present and without speaking with an attorney. And so they've already given statements prior to speaking with counsel.
Williams says this information helps form a timeline before and after Jocelyn's death. So investigators kind of have a better timeline because of these two interviews that they've had with both of the defendants. How vital is that information that they're giving for the prosecution?
It's extremely vital. Whenever a person gives a statement to police officers, everything that you say can be used in a prosecution against you. And they tell you that. They say ahead of time, everything that you say can and will be used against you if you decide to make a statement. And so they are fully aware of that part, at least that they know that whatever they're saying is going to be used or can be used in their prosecution going forward.
Martinez Rangel's story is a bit different from Pena's. Initially, he distanced himself from the commission of the murder and claimed that Franklin was solely responsible. Detectives stopped the interview at this point, but Martinez Rangel reinitiated the conversation, at which time he admitted that he was the person who tied JN's legs and then told Franklin to throw her body into the bayou because the water would wash off the DNA. This part echoes what Pena told investigators, saying Johann then moved JN into the water and said that no DNA would be found on the body due to the water. He also told investigators Martinez Rangel shaved his beard in an effort not to be recognized when news of Jocelyn's murder broke. As part of these investigations or interviews with both defendants, both of them told detectives that they decided to put her body in the water in an effort to cover up DNA so that detectives couldn't track them down. To me, this screams consciousness of guilt. What do you make of that?
I think that's a great way to look at that. That is a consciousness of guilt on that. What I would say is that they are both. They have each admitted that they are covering up a murder. So maybe they didn't commit the murder. Maybe one person didn't commit the murder, but each of them have admitted to at least covering it up. And again, that goes back to being an accomplice, aiding and abetting in some way. So you are fully aware of what's going on, and now you are covering it up. And so, therefore, you can still be tried, charged, and convicted of a capital murder case.
In the same vein of things, one of the defendants pointed to the other and said he shaved his beard because he didn't want to be recognized after the 7-Eleven photos of the surveillance video was posted all over the local media, and also that their outfits both of them were wearing that night just disappeared. One said that the other likely threw them away. Does that go to the same sort of proof of consciousness of guilt?
Well, that's what one person says about the other, right? So again, we go back to what one person is saying. Is that person credible? What is their motive when they're giving that information, right? Those are all things to take into consideration. What we do know is that both of their clothes did go somewhat missing. So we do know that, right? We don't know the reason why this other man shaved his face. We have no idea. That would be something that defense counsel would probably bring up. That's something that to just brings up that brings up doubt. We don't know why he did that. So this other co-defendant, he is saying that we just don't know his purpose for saying it. It can be brought up in a trial, and that will be something that the jurors will have to determine if that is important information or not.
From here, Williams says investigators will be combing through the details of each defendant's story. You said that investigators are, again, going to take this with a grain of salt and go through meticulously and make sure that everything adds up. Do you have any ideas of how detectives would go through and verify what they're saying?
So, well, there's multiple ways that they can do that. So, one, they start with just going to the surveillance video, right? Okay, well, this is where it started at. And then we continue and they talk with witnesses. I believe that there was a cashier that talked about his recollection of what happened and what he did remember, right? And then they continue to look into if there are any other witnesses that may have been involved in any way and saw anything. Then they go back out to the crime scene, take a look at that. You have people who try to just take a look at that, look through everything that was at the crime scene itself, and bring into evidence anything that may stand out there. And so they have enough already to move forward with this charge. Anything else would just build on top of what they already have.
But it's still possible that their stories change with time. We can consider these somewhat of confessions because they're saying what happened. But is it possible that they could recant and say, wait, just kidding, that wasn't true? What do you expect there?
I would say that individuals recant their statements quite often. Whenever a person gives a statement to the police officers initially without attorney counsel given to them, they are just kind of saying things. They may not even be saying the truth. We don't know, right? But after they've spoken with an attorney, maybe they may feel more comfortable to come back and tell the truth, right? Because now they feel that they're not going to go to prison right away, right? Or they don't feel like they're going to be under any type of just pressure. So I think it just depends.
In terms of the facts we do know right now, Jocelyn's cause of death stands out. The way that Jocelyn was murdered was strangulation. And to me, that jumps out right away because it does seem rather intimate. It's somebody killing another human with their hands. And physically, it takes a toll on a person. It's not instantaneous like a gunshot or potentially a stab wound. Is that something that prosecutors would potentially play up if this heads to jury trial, talking about the intimacy of the strangulation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that that would be something that they would bring up in opening statements. And so, whenever we're talking to a jury, you're going to want to just give them emotional, intimate information so it brings them in right away. And so, when you have a crime as heinous as this strangulation, like you just stated before, it is an intimate, just an intimate involvement that the defendant has with the victim. You're up close and personal with this person. And so it creates and presents this person who is extremely heartless, who has no heart at all, right? Because you are looking at this person in the face. You have no desire to back off in any way. That is something, if I was the prosecution, I would bring it up immediately in the opening and playing out throughout the trial.
In terms of a trial, Williams has an idea of what to expect. What do you think will happen moving forward? They plead not guilty, let's say, and they're heading to jury trial. Would they be tried together or separately?
I think it'll be in the state's best interest, more than likely, to probably try it separately. In this case, it just depends, right? Sometimes the defense counsel and the state may come to an agreement where they want to have it tried together or tried separately. It just depends on the facts and the facts as they unfold. Right now, we have surveillance video that shows them doing or at the actual 7-Eleven, right? And then we have two stories that are completely different, um, to say what one person did and what the other person did not. So I think it just really depends on how the case unfolds and what additional information comes out.
Is it possible that they could potentially testify against each other?
It is very much so possible that they can testify against each other. And that happens pretty frequently where there may be a co-defendant who may accept a plea agreement, right? And the other one doesn't want to accept a plea agreement. And as a condition of that plea agreement, they agree to testify in the other person's trial. That happens often. And so it's just a matter of they probably will give them that option to testify against each other. And after they speak with counsel, then they can make an educated decision on what to do.
If the case does head to trial, prosecutors could seek the most severe punishment possible. And because this crime happened in Texas, that has death penalty potential. And prosecutors have previously said that they would consider it if sexual assault was found, and it eventually was. However, Jocelyn's family has come out and told local media they don't support the death penalty. They're not on board with it.
This is such a common issue that comes up. The thing is, a lot of people don't know is that the state of Texas does not have to take into consideration what the alleged victim or their families want. Whenever a actual charge is being brought, now it is that defendant versus the state of Texas. The alleged victim or the victim and their families are now just witnesses for the state of Texas. And what does that mean? That is pretty much where the state, the prosecution, they determine, they decide what they want to bring forth with the charges. They decide how they're going to move forward with their case in chief. They decide what the punishment range is that they are going to be offering. So they can take it into consideration, but ultimately it is up to the prosecution and the DA's office to make that decision.
Is there any sort of timetable for how long they have to make that determination or what's going into their decision?
Not really, because there's no statute of limitations on this particular charge. Whenever they've already brought this charge, they will more than likely give some kind of offer to these defendants. Sometimes they don't give an offer at all, but they more than likely will provide some type of offer if they decide that they don't want to accept that. And they move forward with a trial setting. And in that trial setting, if that individual is found guilty of capital murder, now they are facing the death penalty or life in prison without any parole.
Aside from the shocking details of the case, the background of both suspects has caused additional publicity. Both defendants are undocumented migrants, originally from Venezuela. Martinez Rangel was arrested on March 14th, and Pena was arrested on May 28th. Both men were arrested near El Paso, Texas. One of the reasons that this case is so divisive, in addition to the severity of the crime with the 12-year-old girl and sexual assault, But it's also kind of become a political side of things because both of these defendants are technically undocumented migrants who had been previously arrested. Does any of this factor into the case, the criminal charges against them of murder and sexual assault?
At this time, that information is not pertinent for the actual criminal case. However, if the case continues to move forward to an actual trial, then the state may attempt to bring that into evidence. However, that is considered what we call prior bad acts or a offense that is charged that is unrelated to this particular charge, right? It's not directly involved with the actual charge here. And so there may have to be a hearing where the court can decide on if that information that they are illegal immigrants being brought into the actual trial setting. So after they present the evidence saying, "But this is the reason why we believe that it's important to be brought into this particular trial setting," then the court can make the determination on if it can or if it cannot be allowed. What I would say is that this type of case is one that we have to make sure that we're following along. It's already been brought up to a major height in Houston, Harris County, and the entire state of Texas, again, with the mayor getting involved, Senator Ted Cruz. And so it just plays up to, like you said, in a political world also. And so we have to see what things come from it in the political side and also on this criminal case as well.
From here, Williams expects more in-depth investigations into Jocelyn's death and eventually more information to be released.
When we start with a case at this early stage, there's always going to be just some baseline evidence that comes out, right? And it's shocking evidence. In this particular case, a 12-year-old girl is strangled and murdered. So we know just the baseline information. But as time continues to move on, especially up until a trial setting, there is always going to be additional evidence and information that comes up. And so we are always looking and anticipating additional evidence to come up because a forensic specialist is going to get involved. More and more people are going to become involved in looking into this case, and more evidence, if it is helpful or hurtful for either side, is going to come out.
Both suspects are being held on $10 million bond each, plus an immigration hold. That means even if they do post bond, they still will not be released from the Harris County Jail. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.